Hello everyone and welcome to Makai-World Reviews. And what do we have for the month of February? Well, the Tono Makai, a master of minds and of men, will tell you. I'm going to be looking at movies that have more popular remakes. So I'm going to be looking at the least popular one, or less popular. Some of these might be subjective, but I think I did a good job of seeing which one generally was more popular based on varying metrics. It's very complicated. I'm not going to get into it with you. And we start with an easy one, the 1932 film called Scarface. Is this the one all the rappers have playing on MTV Cribs? Is MTV Cribs still a thing? Hit subscribe and we can find out. Scarface, directed by Howard Hawks, director that worked with the who's who of early Hollywood, like James Cagney, Edward G. Robinson, Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, and lots more. He has a wide variety of writing, directing, and producing credits. Needless to say, he was a busy guy. Written by a cavalcade of writers who wrote a combination of over 200 films. This was based on a novel of the same name by Armitage Trail, which was essentially loosely based on Al Capone. Starring Paul Meany, a man that was called an actor of great integrity, a shy man of taste who chose his roles carefully and cared deeply about every single role he took. I have only seen him in a handful of things, this, The Life of Emile Zola, and The Last Angry Man, made to look into more of his films. Anne Dorvac, woman who was a staple of early Hollywood, but not quite in the leading lady role. That does not undermine her talents, wit, or ability. Another one I've only seen a few films she was in. I don't really recall her in any of them, but it is what it is. Release date for this was April 9th in 1932, and what came out the same week? But the Flesh is Weak, an early comedy about a man who dates old rich women, but likes young hot women. Well, boy howdy does he meet his match. A fun little romp, I'm sure. And Chestnuts. I'm a huge fan of Fleischer cartoons, and this is a Betty Boop classic about a stalwart chess contest that devolves into a hilarious Betty Boop and Bimbo mashup. This live-action mixture with the animation is so fun and frantic, and everyone was clearly, pretty fucked up doing this. Moving over to the plot, we start in 1920 Chicago, and would you believe it, gangsters are running the town. One of them is Big Lou. But Big Lou is killed by his bodyguard and our main man with the facial scars, Tony Camonte, who is in cahoots with the new boss by the name of Johnny Lovo. This causes an uproar with everyone wanting a piece of Big Lou's business, and the cops try to get something out of Tony, but thanks to Lovo, Tony gets out of the police's grip quickly. We also meet Lovo's girlfriend, the disaffected gold digger by the name of Poppy, who Tony is instantly smitten with. We also meet Tony's long-suffering mother and sister Sessa, who he keeps a tight grip on as she wants to live some of the life Tony is living, but he wants to keep her as a child, at home and quiet. Tony's new role as mouthpiece and enforcer for Johnny begins in violence as he and his men begin beating speakeasy owners, killing rival gang bosses, bombing places who don't want to buy hooch from Lovo, and generally painting the town red, as it were. Johnny is worried with Tony getting into skirmishes. He doesn't know if he can win, as Tony sees Lovo's weakness as a liability and continues his war with the North Side and continues to try to court Poppy behind Johnny's back. In time, Tony has become wealthy thanks to his new position, and with increasing regularity does he see Poppy. But it's not all good, as Boris Karloff himself is in charge of the North Side gang now, and has brought Tommy guns into the States. They attempt to drive by, but it doesn't quite go as expected, and Tony and his men retaliate heavily, getting their hands on Tommy guns themselves. With this opening, Tony goes crazy on the North Side, holding nothing back this time, and turning it into a real gang war, including a recreation of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. In the end, Tony and co. take out Frankenstein's monster, and he takes control of the North Side. This causes some tension between him and Johnny Lovo, who is starting to see Tony as less of a stooge and more of a genuine threat. So after Tony forces his sister to leave the club because she was dancing, Lovo strikes, sending men to kill Tony, though thanks to Tony's reckless driving, he escapes, and him and his long-term friend Gino go and take out Johnny, who begs for his life. Tony then calls upon Poppy, solidifying himself as the new leader of the whole town. Of course, the good times don't last, as shortly after, he finds out Gino and Sessa have married and shacked up together, which causes Tony to go crazy with curious jealousy, and he kills Gino. That's all the cops need. They can pin a real crime on Tony for once, and they try to gun him down, but he escapes to his armored apartment. Sessa arrives shortly after to kill Tony, but she can't kill her brother. She's then gunned down by the police, and after a tense standoff, Tony is also killed and dies in the middle of the street, with the blaring lights above him signaling that the world is yours. Well, that was a hell of a movie. Let's look a little deeper into it. Starting with the directing and the cine, this is really a triumph of Hollywood in style. It sets a real standard, along with a few other movies, for the gangster noir film that we still see to this day. The sets are simple but effective. This is Chicago, and it has that grit and backwards charm that as the Windy City continues. The shots are executed with a real talent. The use of shadows in this movie is marvelous, for motive, for foreshadowing. Just really give you a lot to look at on rewatch that you might have missed. The gunplay and violence is equally well done, from fist fights to drive-bys. Really has anything you could want in a gangster film. All these things mixed together really kept me compelled. Moving over to the actors, and the characters, of course. We'll start with Tony, Scarface himself, and a very loose interpretation of Al Capone, but I'm not going to compare the two. The whole film is loosely about Al, as you know, but it's loose enough that Paul really gave it his own spin, his own passion and history to the character. He's crass, a little bit of broken English. He's rough and tumble, and afraid of seemingly nothing. He has a thug charm to him with a lot of charisma. He can command a room, and the fact he thinks himself invincible makes him scary. His mom thinks he's gone inside, his soul is gone, and she might be right. He's a man consumed by things. He wants more and more. He wants everything. The world is yours is a sign he sees every day, and it defines him. He wants the world, money, power. He wants what isn't his, like Poppy. He doesn't care who he has to step on, like when he kills his friend Gino. But in the end, when Sessa dies in his arms, he realizes he has nothing. Nothing. And she is the last thing left, and that's gone now. We see him afraid, genuinely, and then he dies in the street like a nobody. A very powerful performance that had a lot of subtlety to it. To Poppy, she's interesting. She's sarcastic, eye-rolling, but you can tell she likes the danger, she likes the money. There's a scene where she loads a gun for Tony, and she says she has this glint in her eye that you can tell she's embracing the violence. Despite what she says, oh, I don't like this kind of lifestyle. She's a gold digger a little bit, which is another way of saying she's a survivor any way she can in this town gone mad. Her relationship with Tony is not super developed. She's kind of arm candy, but once they get together, the film rapidly approaches its ending. So a well-done performance, but she doesn't get a ton of time to show it off. To Johnny, right from the start, Tony smelled blood with this man. He has big ambition, but no balls, and it's shown wonderfully. He's a coward at heart. He wants to be a gangster, but never does anything for himself. The scene where Gino and Tony confront him about trying to have Tony killed is probably my favorite in the film. The tension, the conversation. Tony saying that Johnny never did anything himself. He had someone else do it. And then he has Gino kill Lovo. It's just great stuff. Johnny was the catalyst and sort of villain. This movie was about Tony. Everyone around him was just there to be consumed. To Gino and Sessa, I wish Gino got a lot more to do. He's in tons of scenes, but he says virtually nothing. He's just Tony's right-hand man. I wish we saw them being friends, having more conversation, doing something, and him and Sessa barely interact. It all felt kind of rushed as a setup for Tony to do something as a point of no return. We see them flirt a few times, then they're married. I do love his look, though. He's always flipping a coin. His suit looks nice. Sessa also gives a lot of passion in her performance. And the scene where she's going to kill Tony, but can't do it is great. These two characters just felt a little underbaked, sadly, but they did the best of what they had. Angelo is the comic relief. Sometimes inappropriately so. He can barely speak English and can't write, but Tony has him around as like a secretary. They do this joke several times, and I'll get to the payoff in a second. That he keeps arguing people on the phone. He answers the phone, and he never takes their name because he can't write. It comes up as a scene from Fawlty Towers with the bellhop who doesn't speak English well, and Mr. Fawlty's always yelling at him. But I have to say the payoff, where he gets shot and answers the phone and tells Tony who it is. It's a puppy, and he's so proud of himself. It was actually well done. All the goofy shtick for that, okay, they sold me at the ending. To the police and its heavy-handed message. This is the worst part. We get an extended scene where people literally sit around and the characters almost literally look at the camera and call for the condemnation of lawlessness, gangsters, etc. It's awful. And it's really underwhelming. This moralizing takes away from the film in a large part. We get the point. You don't need to tell us that. Plus, the police in this movie are just as shifty and evil as the gangsters. I could have done without the grandstanding, to be honest with you. Comparing this to Scarface from 1983, I like this one more. The Pacino Scarface is great. And I think the relationship between Tony and Manny is a lot more compelling because we saw them as friends, equals for a period of time. Beyond that, this one kept a pace up and that I liked. Scarface, we sort of reveled in its own decadence, and that was what they were going for. And it is a great movie. I got a lot more out of this one emotionally, especially from the Tony character, who I feel like understood better than Mr. Montana, who kind of felt cold and distant at times and was hard to get into his head. While both are good films, and seen as classics, I like the setting, the classic gangster thing, a bit more than the Miami chic. So yeah, out of the two, 1932 Scarface edges it out. For me, I think because it doesn't have so much downtime. Going to the music, this is interesting, as it doesn't really have music, not as such. Okay, music plays when they're in the club, on the radio, when they go see a play, and the opening and closing have, the little doo-doo-doo, but that's it. It's set in an urban area where there isn't often music just playing out loud, and that's kind of a cool take. The music that is in it is used well, but ultimately I love the use of silence. Silence and shadows really make this film. I love when the music is important, and they make it here. It's good stuff, but I can't really rate it as a soundtrack because it doesn't have one. Overall, this movie, I was concerned I would like the least this month. I had seen it before years ago on AMC or something like that, and I don't really recall it, but it was good, damn good. Had a lot of small faults, most of which I pointed out, but they don't really take away from the compelling narrative and good acting. This movie I would absolutely recommend, especially fans of gangster films or of the reimagining, to see where all the threads came from. Also, Boris Karloff is in this for a cup of coffee, and that's interesting enough take. He's a gangster. He's not very... His speech pattern doesn't really work for the movie, but whatever. It's a good movie. That's where we're at. Well, that was Scarface, one of my movies with more popular sequels that will be looked at this month. Which Scarface do you prefer? Let me know down below. Also, have me on Instagram under Demon Peaks. Check out my Patreon where you can support me for $1. Come back next week where I'll be looking at the 1958 movie The Fly. Subscribe, and of course, have a great day, a great week. I love you all. From the Tono Makaya, Master of Minds and of Men, and goodbye.